How can a regular guy like me become an ukulele expert? Well, today on our first episode of Just Ask Joe, we're gonna find out. How hard could it be? So I'm with Joe, the expert, the master luthier, the dad. So our first episode today of Just Ask Joe, we're gonna ask some questions from you folks out there on the internet and see what we come up with. So our first question of the day is from Augusto_AMC. Do all grades of koa sound different, or do they only differ aesthetically?
Ooh, that's a great question, Augusto. And quite honestly, koa is so unique in its color, its grain, and its density. Now, the density plays a big role in how that tone is going to be. When we look at a brighter sound, a lot of times we see that in koa that tends to be a little bit lighter in color, but also lighter in weight. But then when we look at, say, something that's a little bit warmer or complex in tone, typically it's the darker shades of koa that tend to be a bit denser, which in turn translate into a more warmer or mellower tone. Now, as far as curl and figure, those don't necessarily play a huge factor, more so that aesthetics of that wow factor.
Would one be able to argue that since curl comes from compression of the tree, that certain curly parts of the wood may be slightly more dense than the non-curl portion of the tree? Would you be able to say that varying densities throughout that same piece of wood with the curl be more well-rounded with lighter colors and darker colors with lower densities and higher densities?
Definitely. Curly wood undeniably ends up being denser. It ends up being harder. When we go to cut it, you can tell just by the reaction that you get on the saw and the feed rates that we're cutting the work pieces at. So really curl, in this case, especially that really compression curl, the stuff that we see that brings all that drama to the color, grain, and everything, is undeniably harder, which in turn is going to translate to tone.
Cool. So let's move on to our next question from Davis S15_. Can you make full custom ukuleles with unique woods from the ground up?
Ooh, we can, to a certain degree. Some woods we rely upon experience as far as tone. When we look at other woods, most of the time we're going to look at the density of the wood. We're going to look at the way the wood has been cut. Is it quarter sawn or vertical grain? Especially when we look at the soundboard and where we need that strength of vertical grain quarter sawn workpieces. Now, woods that would be outside of what we've already built from, some of that would be uncharted waters as far as how that tone is going to be. We may rely either upon a wood that's similar in density, knowing the experience that we have on what tone we get from that wood, or more importantly, building the instrument and really hearing for ourselves what it's going to sound like. So some of that is going to require thicknesses, vinyl thickness of the soundboard. We're going to check and do some tap tuning then to see what kind of tone we're getting at specific thicknesses. So looking outside of the normal, it would take a more detailed eye to really achieve the best possible sound that we could get.
But we can.
We could, yes.
So we can design as Kanileʻa and build custom-made instruments with just about any tone wood that may be harvested and created to be what we need.
Yes, for sure.
Cool. All right, coming up next. Oh, this is a good one. From at user LW1GW4OE8U.
Okay.
It's a long username here, but a great question. I chose a tenor islands for my inlaid instrument. How much can you inlay the soundboard before it would adversely affect the tone?
You know, we'd never really pushed that envelope. I think the closest that we got to it is most recently building Ian Dungy's and Oliver Steele's instrument, where those two instruments really had probably by percentage the most inlay work that we've ever done on the soundboard. So the curiosity side of me was, how's it going to sound? Let's hear how these instruments are going to sound once we put some strings on. And amazingly, they sounded beautiful for the amount of inlay work that we've done on them. So to say that we've maxed out the amount of inlay work, I would say those two instruments in particular, we did a pretty good percentage of inlay to still have an amazing sounding ukulele.
Yeah. So there was quite a lot of inlay done, sand and paua abalone into the soundboard, and they still do sound amazing. So, like Joe is saying, we've pushed the envelope a little bit, and very recently too. But you would say maybe there's more to push too?
Wow.
With all of our innovations on that instrument, being a DK, we already know we're getting a lot of tone.
Yeah.
So maybe going the DK route, we could push it more?
Yeah. And historically, when we've done any kind of reduction of mass, which we do, our true reduction on the inside of the instrument, which a lot of people don't even know it's happening, especially on our platinum. But when we look at removing mass from the soundboard, in this case, creating that pocket, which ultimately got inlaid, we learned literally how that sound or the sound would be affected if it was to be adversely affected. And it really wasn't. So it's basically saying we could inlay more.
All right.
Yeah.
You heard it here first.
Right.
First time I'm reading these questions as well. This is from @MikeK4708. First of all, they said thank you for doing the breakdown. And then they're asking, there can't be many instruments with a one-piece neck as standard. Does having one piece as the neck, does it affect the tonal qualities?
I think by having a one-piece neck, to a certain degree, there's a structural benefit that we see. Instead of putting pieces or building pieces in order to have a workpiece that's big enough. Now, when we look at our platinum or a koa laminated neck, that's a bit different because we're laminating the hardwoods very specifically in grain, and more importantly to withstand that string tension as the neck cantilevers off of the body. So in that particular case, we're designing the neck to be laminated. But when we look at other forms of lamination that some builders do, ultimately, you do sacrifice strength in the workpiece. That's what I see.
So mostly strength.
Mostly strength. That's what we'd be looking at.
So not too much tone differences?
I don't see the tonal difference either, yes, bad or worse. I wouldn't know. In the past, we did use a three-part or three-piece neck because of the accessibility of material. But now we're able to really source that genuine mahogany one-piece neck, which in turn, in my builder's experience, has taught me that's a structural improvement as far as longevity.
So sticking to the discussion of necks, from @RichardRios4578, why do I need a slotted headstock versus non-slotted?
Why do you need it?
They said need.
Well, one, because it's beautiful. Let's face it. The slotted headstock has its own uniquenesses. But when we look tonally and how much mass we're removing, now, it may be just grams in weight, but those weight differences make a difference when you're playing, especially when you're looking at an hour and a half, a 2-hour jam session where the weight of the headstock can start to take an effect on you. With the slotted headstock, one, yes, aesthetically it looks really, really cool. Two, you're able to relieve some of that weight that's on the top of the headstock. And then when you integrate the stealth tuner, which gives you that accuracy, that 18-to-1 gear ratio, the functionality of a good tuner, but being able to keep that headstock nice and sleek, ultimately you're creating a better playing experience outside of the aesthetics that comes with the slotted headstock. Now, when we look tonally at the instrument, you can physically see the difference in the string travel as the string comes off of the nut and down towards the tuner. And by breaking that string angle steeper, you're actually adding more string tension to the overall scale length, ultimately affecting tone when we see string energy and how it plays its role across the fingerboard and onto the saddle, and of course delivering all that energy to the body of the instrument. So there's the aesthetic beauty, there's also the functionality and the comfort that it brings, and then ultimately, of course, the tonal response that you're going to get by putting on a slotted headstock. So that's the reason why you want that or need it, really.
This is a interesting question that I don't see often either. From Riverbank 4126. So they're asking, what is the best way to break in a new Kanileʻa ukulele when it arrives?
Ooh, great question. The best way. Play your instrument. Honestly, by playing your instrument, that vibration that's being created by playing your instrument is ultimately allowing the wood to kind of learn its new job, to learn that elasticity that we're asking it to work towards. And by playing your instrument, one, you get more comfortable playing it. It really makes you feel better as you play your instrument. But tonally, and what's happening with the actual string energy is all from playing your instrument. Now, of course, I've heard of, and this doesn't sound too extreme, but it makes sense to them, where they would put the instrument brand new in front of a speaker and play classical music and allow that vibration to hit the instrument, which ultimately is doing the job of playing the instrument. And I'm sure there are a few other toys and other methods that people have come up with. But ultimately, my recommendation is to play your instrument. And that alone is going to really help the sound to develop.
I'll add a tiny little question to an ukulele first arriving. How important is it to slowly, or maybe not, to acclimate the instrument to your current humidity environment or even temperature?
That's really important. That acclimation is in segments. So especially when you're going to either an extreme climate, whether it's really, really moist or really, really dry, you want that acclimation time, and to say a set number. Ideally, if you play your instrument a half an hour a day, half an hour to 45 minutes a day, and slowly acclimate your instrument for that half an hour and 45 minutes to then putting it away in the case. If you're in a drier environment, of course, adding a humidifier, making sure that that kind of humid environment is comfortable for your instrument, keeping it right at about anywhere between 45 to 50% relative humidity inside the case. But ultimately, allowing your instrument to really get used to its new home. And that can take 30, 45 minutes for every single time you play over 3, 4, 5 weeks to allow your instrument to acclimate.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, that about wraps it up for today's session of Just Ask Joe. And if you have any other questions that you'd like us to ask on a future episode, please leave them down in the comments below. And please like this video, subscribe, so that you can be up to date with us whenever we post a new video. And keep on strumming, and we'll see you next time. Aloha.
Aloha.